In lesson M003, we're going to talk about the viewports. The objectives of this lesson, we're going to look at the default views in 3ds Max and how we can use them to our benefit. We're going to toggle from a single to multi-view layout so that you're able to get comfortable with being able to maximize the area in order to get in there and zoom the details, or back out and view an object from several different views, which will give you a good feel in 3D space. We're also going to learn how to edit viewport display options, and then I'm going to talk to you a little about customizing the layout options, especially with the new features that 2014 has to offer. We'll begin by just kind of looking at, again, we're not going to do any creating in this stage, but we're going to get familiar with how the viewports work. I've created a teapot here inside 3ds Max, and you'll notice that I have 4 different views of that teapot. We have our front view over here to the right, which is we're looking at it from the side, top, and then our left. Finally, we have our perspective view. And the way the viewports work, we're going to be able to change those in a moment, is the viewports by default, these 3 are what we call orthographic projection views. They're like perfect side views. They're sort of like blueprints. Now, if we were to look at a front view of this teapot in real life, it would not look this perfect. It would actually have a little bit of distortion, and that's due to the perspective view that we see, the vanishing point of all objects. So these are orthographic projection views, and it's very difficult for someone new to 3D to get comfortable with using these, but that's what's going to keep you organized in your 3D scenes, be able to stack things on top of each other. It's very difficult to do that in this perspective view, and I'll show you why in a moment. But by default, your orthographic projection views are what we call wireframe. They allow us to see through the object, specifically if you have one object overlapping with another or one inside another object. In a natural, realistic view, such as down here, you wouldn't see that. So think of this as like a schematic blueprint. And these views are very important to you. They're actually more important than this perspective view because these are true views. Each viewport, when selected, will become highlighted with a yellow box. So you can only be in one viewport at a time. But if you make a change in the front, that change will occur in all of the other viewports. Again, think of it as having multiple cameras looking at one object. And if you move that object, all cameras would see the change in that object. So we'll look at the front viewport here, and we know we're selected in it because it's actually highlighted with a yellow box. And up at the top of each viewport, you have a series of little text pieces here. We hit the little plus sign. We can quickly maximize this viewport by clicking there. And I'm going to show you some faster ways of doing that later. Or we can restore it, which means it'll bring it back to the original state. As you can see, there's several down here. We can turn off our grids. And we could also use the view cube and shut that off specifically. We'll look at that in a moment. Next, we have the word front. This is the name of the viewport or orthographic view you're looking at. At any point, I can click on the word front and change it to a different view. Perhaps I want 2 left views. Maybe one view I'm going to zoom in and maybe one I'm going to zoom back. That doesn't matter. Again, think of it as 2 different cameras. One camera is closer than the other. It's going to see the view a little closer. I can also restore that just by going back in here and turning on the left or front view. So I'm going to go ahead and click front, and there we are. We're back. Finally, we have the word wireframe, which is in these 3 viewports as well as realistic. And at any point, you can change these. You can go in and choose a realistic view, which allows me to see the teapot in a solid state with shadows. Now, as we get more complex, your operating system or your computer may not be able to run efficiently by having thousands of objects on your scene and being in realistic mode. So there's others such as shader, constant colors, and you'll see how these all kind of benefit specific needs that you'll have. The consistent colors and edge faces, or the realistic, I'll go in and do realistic with edge faces, allows us to see the wireframe of this object as well as the solid state. And it's important because we're going to talk about model complexity and how important it is to actually have the wireframe there to determine how smooth or how rough an object is. The more mesh we have, the smoother the object will look. We'll talk about this in a future lesson. So I'm going to go back in, and for argument's sake, I'm always going to leave edged faces on for demonstration purposes, but that's up to you. We also have the ability to come down to the perspective view and change the realistic view to a wireframe as well here. So if I come in and do a wireframe, now I can see it in a kind of a perspective view. And the perspective view is simply this virtual camera that's sitting out in the middle of nowhere. There's really no constraints or controls on it. And in a moment, I'm going to show you how to manipulate that perspective view. As we go back, we look at this cube up in the right-hand corner. This is called your view cube. I personally will not be using it for demonstration purposes in this class. However, you're welcome to use it. If you'll notice, you can click on the various parts of the cube, and it instantly changes the direction. Now, as nice as this seems, there are some difficulties. When we're working with bigger objects, for instance, maybe you're going to click something here. You go to click it, and you accidentally hit the view cube instead. You end up changing the view, and all you wanted to do is select an object. So it can get in the way. And if it gets in the way, you have a couple options. The one I'm going to show you is to go to the word Views in your application bar, hit the word View Cube, and simply turn off the View Cube. That takes it away. You want it back on, you can just repeat the process by going to Views, View Cube, and turning that back on. And that cube will be there for you. There are some additional settings you can explore on your own. You can actually turn it off, except for the viewport you're working in, and that's up to you. A little bit on navigating. As you'll see here, I'm actually moving the teapot, but it's what I'm really not, it's kind of an optical illusion, is I'm not moving the teapot. The teapot is actually still sitting at the origin, and we're going to talk about that. But what I am doing is I'm clicking with my middle mouse in the grid area, and I'm moving my camera. So I'm actually moving the camera that's looking at the teapot, not moving the teapot. And there's a difference there. This teapot is still in the same location that it's been. It hasn't been moved from that location. I can also click with my middle mouse and roll up and down, and that lets me zoom in and out of the teapot. Again, I'm not making the teapot bigger. I am getting closer to it, or I'm moving farther away. So one of the things I want you to practice after this video is you don't even need an object. You could just zoom in and out, and you'll see how the grid changes. But I simply have taken my middle mouse to position my object that I want to focus on, and then I move the wheel up and down, and that will allow me to get closer so that I can work on some of the details that I'm going to be doing when I model. The sooner you get comfortable with this procedure, the sooner you'll be able to move on and actually get comfortable with the whole process. 99% of the students that I've worked with in the past have struggled with modeling because they weren't comfortable with moving around the viewport. So that is something you definitely want to practice before you get too crazy with the modeling process. Last but not least, we come down here to the perspective view, and I'm going to show you the tools here at the bottom. Many of these do the same thing I just showed you. We have our zoom tool. When we click the zoom tool, we can move in and out. So if you forget about the shortcuts on the mouse, no problem. Just remember that you have an option down here to do several things. You can zoom all, so that you're zooming all windows at the same time. You can hit this zoom extents, which the current viewport you're in will take the object and zoom it to fit the screen. We also can do that for all 4 views. But you'll notice that at the bottom here there's a little arrow. If you hold that icon down, there's actually another option. And what that's going to do is when you select an object, for instance, I'll take my select tool, I'll select my object, and I hit the one that's white, that zoom extends the object that's selected. So we'll take a look at this in future lessons as we start getting more comfortable. We have what we call the orbit tool. And the orbit tool brings up this circular wheel, like a steering wheel. And you'll notice that depending on where you put that, it's going to let you orbit around. Now, if you grab one of these X's and you pull up and down, it spins it like in a 360 degree. But if you come out here, you can just freely move anywhere you want. Again, this is important to get comfortable with this procedure, because when you're modeling, if you can't get in something close enough to get the detail you need, your model will suffer. The one problem with the orbit tool is it's only used for what we call the perspective view. If you accidentally use the orbit tool in the front view, what you do now is you've actually taken away the orthographic front view, and you've created a standard orthographic view, which looks cool, but again does not help you in the modeling process. When we talk about modeling, I'm going to stress to you how important it is. Where a lot of students fail is when they try to realign this and say, okay, this looks good. That's not a true view. You have to come back up and go back into the front view. Now, this is perfectly at a 90-degree angle on the side of this teapot. So when you model, your modeling process will look nice and clean. If you do this and turn it, this view is going to give you a lot of trouble because you have no sense of depth at this point. Until you get very comfortable with modeling in 3D, you really need to be comfortable with doing it in the orthographic projection view. All right, we talked about maximizing the viewports. We can do that by coming up here and clicking, but we also have this icon down here at the bottom, which is Maximize Viewport Toggle. I click that on. The current viewport that I'm in actually maximizes. What we're going to do now is we're going to learn that you can come over here to the middle of the viewport, and you'll see an arrow pop up. I can take my left mouse and click and drag and actually adjust these viewports. Perhaps I want two bigger ones and two smaller ones. If you like this view and you plan on using it a lot in the future, come over here to the left and it says create a new viewport tab layout. I click and I actually have these pre-made options in here, which I could say, all right, I'm going to go ahead and maybe click this one. It'll automatically bring this up and it's going to add it to my list over here. I can go ahead and add another one. Maybe I'm going to work this way. And now all I have to do is just click on the viewports over here to the left, and they automatically update for me. Now I can also adjust some of these. So there are a lot of benefits to coming in here and actually working with these settings here. We can come down and let's grab the 4 quads again. And now I can pull down and maybe to the left. And if you'll notice, if I jump back here and go back to 4, that 4 automatically takes on this this setting. So now what I can do is come back here where it says quad 4 and see how they change. So I can have several different quad 4s that would actually work. And if I change this and update it, it will automatically stay like that. While we're in the viewports, if you do get too confused and you've got a lot of stuff going on, one of the things we're going to talk about when we look at file management is how to reset your workspace. If you come up to the file management and hit reset, it's going to ask you if you want to save it. No, I don't want to save it. Don't save. Yes, I want to reset. That puts the 4 quads back, wipes out the left side, and removes all objects and materials that you currently have. With that, we're going to go ahead and conclude this lesson on viewports. I strongly encourage you to go in and play around with the viewports, and in a future lesson we're going to create an object that we'll be able to use and test out these viewports.